Hello and welcome to the Red Mountain Community Church podcast, where you can hear conversations with the people of Red Mountain Community Church as we pursue Jesus together. Each episode highlights what God is doing in someone's life or a specific theme in light of what God has revealed in the Bible. I'm Peter Franson from Spirit Blade Productions and your fellow seat warmer at Red Mountain Community Church. My co-host today is Tom Holland, our pastor of young adult. I think I heard, it's actually Zach Hollifield. But I feel like shortly before you came on staff, Zach, that I told you that you reminded me of someone, but I don't know if it was Tom Holland or not. I think I heard after the fact that you have gotten Tom Holland from people. I
have. There was a junior hire a few months ago who I think after the newest Spider-Man movie or something came out was like, "Hey, you look like Tom Holland." And I barely know what Tom Holland looks like. I've not seen any films with him in it, so movie stars are usually attractive, so I usually just take it.
Yeah. There you go. That's a win. I'm trying to remember who I was thinking, because I don't think it was Tom Holland. Do you remember that exchange with me?
Not exactly.
No, okay.
No.
Yeah, it was probably weird and awkward and one you wanted to forget, and that's fine. That's totally understandable. So Preston did an awesome job hosting last time, so I wanted to tip my hat to him, and he was very kind to say during the episode, "Peter, wherever you are, we hope you're feeling better." Well, Preston, while I was listening to that, I was on the toilet and shortly after felt much better. So thank you very much. I do have to say this though, and this is what I would have mentioned this if I would have hosted that episode about it wasn't a shark attack, it was a killer whale attack story that I was sick, so I wasn't able to host that episode. But Arian, who kind of serves as our producer, quote unquote, and is in the room with us right now, manning the recording station. But she sent me information about his story and a link. She said, "Here's a YouTube video with some more information." And I clicked this link. This was not, Arian, a video with more information. This was a video of the attack.
Wait, really?
Yes. I was
there a warning?
Gosh, do I get a trigger warning?
Yeah.
I'm just I was watching this presentation of killer whale show and the narration, the killer whale, da 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 da, and then suddenly, I was like, is this someone's gonna pop in? Is this a news story from ABC and they're just showing some B-roll here? I was waiting for something to come in to talk about the event. I didn't know I was going to see the event. So my gosh.
That's jarring.
She's cracking up over here. Anyway, so adventures in podcasting, everybody. Nothing like it. So speaking of Jaws, I don't know, that's a horrible transition, but we've got an irresistible question, Zach, this time.
Okay.
And it is, what's one movie that should never be remade?
Well, I can think of some really awful ones. I don't know that even just the mention of them might get us an explicit rating, so I won't mention some of those. A movie that should never be remade. I mean, personally, and this is it already has been remade, but it was a huge mistake, was Space Jam.
That wasn't a sequel. That was a remake that they did? Or was it
I guess it was a sequel. Well, I mean, is it a sequel? Is it a remake? Basically an NBA star goes around with Looney Tunes and saves the world. So, sequel, but it's also a remake, just putting in LeBron James and Michael Jordan. And I just think that genre of reproducing the same kind of movie with just a different athlete or just a different person. Yeah. Just get more creative. Yeah. Just come up with something new. Yeah. It's just a waste of time. Yeah. Yeah. And also I would say Narnia movies. I just think leave them alone. I don't know if they've been well done. I don't know if they can be well done. So I would say just stay away from my boy Lewis. But a series I would like to see a movie of is, or see a series show or a movie is Lewis's Space Trilogy. Oh, I know. Yeah. They should make that into either a 3-part movie or some kind of TV series. I think it's coming in our lifetime. Is it? Because I believe maybe in the next, I want to say 15 or 20 years from now, that will hit the public domain. And then I think people are just going to go nuts and we're going to see all kinds of terrible adaptations. Yeah, it's probably not going to be well done, but it has so much potential if it was. It's just a great 3-part story. I really want to come back to it because I read the first half of the first book when I was in college and I wasn't in the right headspace for it. I was
I want to read nerdy sci-fi that has some, Christian stuff in it. I wasn't ready for what that series really is, which is like, no, this is more. It's kind of like the Screw Tape Letters, where it's like this. You really got to be in for the philosophy and the human commentary with some dressing of the fantastical or the science fiction or whatever.
It's an apologetic in a sense about just like human progress by any means versus the Christian worldview. It's wonderful. I could talk about that trilogy forever.
Oh, sweet.
So yeah, cool. You should read it. You should finish it.
Nice. Okay. I'm not really precious about things not being remade. I think that because I've been a comic book fan for most of my life, I've seen how the same character under different creative control can be interpreted differently, and there can be good things that come from that. And so I kind of feel like I think as the older I get, the more I take that lack of expectation into the theater with me and just say, you know what? As long as it's, selfishly speaking, as long as it's something that appeals to my tastes, I don't care if you remake something and it's not like the original, or if it's better, or I'd rather it not be worse, but it's. I don't think I really have a preference there, which is very surprising because I have lots of preferences that I could usually tell you about really weightless things, but. Anyway, as a reminder, guys, you can message us on Instagram or Facebook with suggestions for fun things that we could do or talk about before the interview, but for now, we are going to move things along. Earlier today, Zach and I spent some time talking with Keith Braun, an Elder Emeritus at Red Mountain Community Church, just about his life and the various ways that he has devoted himself to the Lord and what God is calling him to do, and kind of what motivated specifically those things, which it was really interesting and rewarding to dig into. So I hope that you guys will find that to be the case as well. Here's that conversation now. Well, Keith, thank you so much for sitting in the hot seat, although I don't think it'll feel too hot. But I appreciate you taking time out and just being willing to chat with us.
Well, glad to be here. It's an honor to be here, in fact, and I hope that and pray that what is said would just honor the Lord and would edify our church.
Well, I think it will. I've been looking forward to getting into what we're going to talk about and just hearing more of your thoughts and perspective. I mean, you have always struck me as a fairly quiet guy, but you certainly, when there's something to be said, then you'll step into that moment. But I mean, you're not this super blabby, chatty guy, and so this is kind of a neat opportunity for me to kind of hear more about what your thought processes and feelings have been about things in your life. So I'm wondering if you can start by just giving us a snapshot of your life in terms of your immediate family, your work, and what stage of life you're in.
Well, I'm now 70 years old. I've been married happily to my wife, Nancy, for most of the 48 years we've been married. She was the Red Mountain Women's Ministry pastor from 2001 through 2017, so she's maybe a little more famous than I am. We have 4 adult children. Our oldest one, and I'm going to withhold her name, is a worker in a Muslim country in North Africa, along with her family. Our next child, Julie, lives with her husband, Corey, and 3 sons here in Mesa and attends Red Mountain. And my son, Jeff, lives with his wife, Jenna, and 3 kids in the Bay Area around San Francisco, and he works as an engineer. And we had those children the regular way.
Okay.
And if you get my drift.
Yeah.
No, how is that done?
I'm not going to go into it. But then we had another child through the adoption process. Kaylin was adopted from Korea, and we were 45 years old when we adopted her, and she lives in San Clemente.
Okay. Yeah, I definitely want to circle back to that at some point. What are you're retired now, is that right?
Oh yes, I'm retired, And I was an orthopedic surgeon, and enjoyed working with my hands in the medical field. And now I still like working with my hands, but mostly on things with four wheels.
Okay, nice. When did you, if there is a time you remember, when did you first come to faith in Jesus? How did that come about?
I was raised in a Christian home in Burbank, California, and I had one sibling. Her name was Barbara, and she just died last month from ALS, also known as Lou Gehrig's disease. And she was a strong believer, and she left a real legacy and great testimony. And we had her memorial service about 3 weeks ago, and it was just a real time of joyful sorrow. You know, only a Christian can know what that means.
Right.
And I was by nature a very wild kid, not in the sense of being disobedient, but just daring and way out there in terms of what I would do, riding my bike as fast as I could, or climbing the highest tree, or wandering off in the mountains that were nearby, blowing things up, just stuff like that was way out there. And my mom was abused by her dad when she was little, and she went on to develop mental illness, and I'm sure I contributed to her mental problems, especially anxiety, through the way I chose to live.
And I need to talk to you to help me understand my youngest, because it sounds, I mean, he's a daredevil too. So, oh my gosh.
Yeah, when I was in the fifth grade, she, my mother, attempted suicide by slashing her wrists, and there was blood all over the kitchen, and she spent a few weeks in a mental hospital. But even though she had mental illness, when she was thinking clearly, she was a student of the Scripture, and she chose to obey the commands of Scripture. She chose to be a good mother to my sister and I, and she was particularly good at discerning truth and discerning what was false teaching, and why it was false, and she imparted that into me. My dad was the most Christ-like man I've ever met. I really don't recall him ever sinning. I'm sure he did, but I never saw it. He was born on Christmas, and he died at Easter time, like somebody I know. And that's the way he lived his.
Took me a second.
That's the way he lived his life, you know. Wow. And he nurtured my mom through the mental problems, and he was just a great dad, and he just purposed to love her and his family unconditionally, and serve in the church. He attended a Mennonite Brethren church in Pacoima, California. Now, Pacoima is like several notches down in the status of cities around the San Fernando Valley.
Okay.
And it was a Hispanic Anglo church plant. And we met in a farmhouse, and I remember Sunday school in a bedroom, all the kids sitting on a bed, and later going to Sunday school in a barn. And my Sunday school teacher, who was the pastor's wife when I was 7 years old, said, "You know, Keith, you really are not a Christian because your mom and dad are strong Christians. It has to be something that's individual, and you need to think about that." And I did. I went home and I thought about it. I remember lying down in bed that night and saying, "Yep, I think you are right, Sunday school teacher," and I trusted Jesus as my Savior when I was 7 years old at that point. That's about it for my
Yeah. So that
conversion story.
Yeah. So then, fast forwarding many years after that, you served on the elder board here at Red Mountain Community Church. How long were you on the elder board, and what kinds of ministries have you been involved in at RMCC?
We first began to attend Red Mountain in 1996. And around that time, God put it in my heart the desire to serve as an elder. And in 1998, the elder board here at Red Mountain asked me to join them. I had an interest in missions, and I served on the missions subgroup. I think it's now called the sending subgroup of the elder board. And I was also secretary of the elder board before Linda Lindstrom took over doing that. And I think that helped me pay attention because I knew I had to write everything down. So I served as a governing elder here for 19 years. In 2017, I got kicked off the elder board because I was 65 years old. And that made me an emeritus elder. And, a lot of people might criticize or just question, I should say, Red Mountain for transitioning seasoned elders off the governing board at age 65, but I feel it's a good thing. I began to notice how the average age of the elder board was creeping up. And I made this chart on a piece of chart paper with colored pencils and stuff, all of the elders that ever served at Red Mountain, and then I figured out what the average age was and drew a graph. And from 1990, when Red Mountain started, the average age was about 40 years old. And in 2016, when I made this graph, it was about 57. And some people said, well, let's just add some younger elders. But I projected that as well. And even if you add young men to be elders, it still doesn't halt the progression of the average age. The only way to keep the average age of the elders in check was to have a mandatory retirement. So why do we do this? Well, I think we needed to keep the focus of the church, the vision cast for the church by the elder board, directed toward the younger generation. We don't need crotchety old elders that can't recognize when changes need to be made and live in the past. And that's what older guys tend to do. I think what we need is young, capable leadership, and that will bring in young families. And bringing in young families will make an enduring church. And we don't want our church to just get grayer and grayer. So my first ministry at Red Mountain, when I first came in 1996, was taking over the 5th and 6th grade program. Back then, the 5th and 6th graders were not part of the children's ministry, and they weren't part of the youth ministry.
Okay.
They were their own thing. So Nancy, my wife, and I did this for 13 years and taught 5th and 6th grade Sunday school. I really love 5th and 6th graders because their brains are starting to develop a little bit. And they're not, I don't like junior hires so much, but I like 5th and 6th graders because they haven't had that attitude of a junior hire yet. And they're really good sponges for teaching the truth of Scripture. And our Sunday school class, we had 1 Peter 3:15 as our key verse, but sanctify Christ as Lord in your hearts, always being ready to make a defense to everyone who asks you to give an account for the hope that is in you, yet with gentleness and reverence. So our 5th and 6th grade class became a doctrine class, apologetics, and hermeneutics.
Wow.
Not using those big words, of course, but that's essentially what we taught. And I really enjoyed doing that. Nancy and I have also taught inductive Bible studies for adults here and there through the years. And we have enjoyed taking books of the Bible and letting them speak to us through the observation and interpretation and application process of inductive Bible study. And the women did it quite a bit on Tuesday morning, but for the men, it wasn't really offered here. And we've held 5 or 6 of those kind of classes, and I'd like to do it again in the spring. I've been thinking about doing the book of Hebrews, which is kind of scary to tackle that one.
Oh, that's cool. But now you've also been on multiple medical mission trips to Africa. What kind of work did you do there? I mean, medical, obviously, but what kind of work did you do there, and what motivated those trips for you?
In the fall of 2002, I received a call from a pediatrician friend in Tucson, and he invited me to go to a medical missions conference in North Carolina. And Nancy and I had said long before that if the call came to missions, we would say yes, because we already said yes. We were just waiting for the call. So when that phone call came, I just knew it right then, that this was the beginning. God says, yep, now is the time. You already said yes, so I'm going to direct you at this point. So at this conference, we learned of a Christian missions hospital in Kenya. It's called Tenwick Hospital. And in July of 2003, we went with our 6-year-old daughter to Kenya for 7 weeks. And it was kind of a crazy time to go because the United States State Department said you shouldn't travel to Kenya. British Air wouldn't fly into Kenya, so we had to go to Uganda and then have a short hop into Kenya because there were threats to the embassy by terrorists at that time. Wow. So it was kind of a scary thing. And then I got there and it even got scarier because I was the only orthopedic surgeon for miles, and people came out of the woodwork for musculoskeletal care. So I had never worked so hard or done so many weird cases with such primitive equipment. I don't know, you guys remember the TV show MacGyver?
Yeah, I do.
He takes some pocket knife and duct tape or something and make something that would help him, save the world. And I must have a little bit of MacGyver in me, and God knew that. And I was able to help a lot of people, fix a lot of people with what seemed like duct tape and baling wire.
Wow.
Just by real primitive means. I remember one guy came in with an axe in his head.
What?
No. Like in his head.
No.
And he had been in a fight with his brother. That's what happens to brothers in Kenya. When the father dies, they begin to hate each other because of the inheritance squabbles.
Oh my goodness.
So he comes into the emergency room with an axe in his head, and I get a call, and I said, well, I'm really not a neurosurgeon. And the guy in the emergency room said, you are a bone doctor, Doctori. This axe is in a bone.
Oh, gosh.
So I took him to the operating room, yanked the axe out of his head, and cleaned all the crud and blood and hair out of his brain tissue. Just kind of washed it and gently scraped it, picked stuff out, and closed the membrane over the brain and laid the bones of the skull back, and then sewed up the scalp and put him on antibiotics and prayed a lot. And the guy walked out about 3 or 4 days later.
What?
He was doing pretty good. Yeah.
3 to 4 days?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
So just stuff that was probably one of the most off the wall things I did when I was in Kenya. But
Wow.
It was like that. Every day had something that was not too far away from that.
So now, Tell me a little bit about the motivation. You said that you guys had kind of already said yes to missions beforehand. I mean, were you thinking about the possibility that it could be the stereotypical we're going to Africa to do mission? Because I feel like that's a stereotype. It's like, well, God might call me to be a missionary in Africa, So did you have that possibility in mind? And whether or not that's the case, what kind of motivated that yes beforehand?
I was serving as the vice president of the Student Missionary Union at Biola University, and we had a missionary conference every year, and I had a big role in that. And one of the speakers that we had was Luis Palau.
Oh, yeah, I know that name.
And he challenged everybody that was attending a banquet that closed the conference to do that thing about saying yes to God beforehand to missions. I think he used the illustration of Daniel in the Bible, purposing in his heart that he would not defile himself with the king's food. He did that ahead of time. Then when it came up that the king was trying to feed him all this rich stuff that he wasn't kosher or whatever, he had already made up his mind. And that's a powerful thing in our lives if we purpose in our hearts to do or not to do certain things. And so that was something that we honored when the call came to missions.
Wow. Okay, so I want to switch tracks. There's so many interesting tracks and that I've been looking forward to covering, and we're jumping from one to the other. There's no great slick host transition that I can do for these, but we're gonna hit as many as we can because I love these all. So you guys have an adopted daughter. You mentioned that at the beginning, and you adopted her, you said, in your mid-40s?
Yes.
So I'm 44 right now, and I'm thinking to myself, what the crap? Seriously, that's a thing to take on. Let's see, what's the age difference between your youngest bio kid and your adopted daughter?
12 years.
12 years, my gosh. Okay, so tell me how that desire appeared and then grew in your minds, in your hearts, to the point of following through on that.
When I was maybe 5 or 6 years old, my parents took me to downtown Los Angeles to the Church of the Open Door to hear the Korean orphan choir. So they just sang with these angelic voices, and I was impressed with their singing, but I also listened to the message afterward that they needed to be adopted. And I begged my mom and dad to adopt me a brother because I didn't have a brother and I wasn't too fond of my sister at that time. And my parents didn't do it. And the memory kind of faded away. Then fast forward to 1996, I think it was in the spring of 96, I was at a nursing home making rounds on a patient there, and a nurse had brought a small Asian child in from China and was showing her coworkers. She had just adopted it, the child, and she asked me to examine the child's hips, because they might bind them up like a papoose or something there, and that's not good for their hips. So I examined the kid's hips. They were okay. And while I was examining the baby's hips, I heard this voice inside my head that said, "You should do this." I go, "You got to be kidding! I don't think I need another child right now, Lord." But the thought didn't go away. And a couple days later, I talked to Nancy, and it kind of hit her the same way. And then we talked to our bio kids, as you call them, the regular way kids. And they were, of course, excited about it. And that got the ball rolling. So Kaylin was born in Korea in September of 1996. And in January of '97, we went to the LA airport and picked her up.
Okay. Wow. So it wasn't the child that you were examining.
No.
But that was kind of like the trigger.
That was the
moment
trigger
that God seemed to use to plant a thought in your mind, and then you took it to your wife, and you got your kids involved too, and asking them what they thought of it, and they were in support of the idea. Mm-hmm. Wow.
And she's been a big blessing to our family. We're so glad that she was able to join us, and it's just been an experience that I felt was God-led from the beginning, and God blessed all the way along.
Hmm. And does she sing? I mean, were you hoping for that to work out with the Korean choir, like you bring one of those home? And
no, she doesn't sing.
Oh, okay. All right.
I don't even know if she can.
Well,
she's quiet.
You gave it a shot.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay, so having kind of seen several aspects of your life and just how God has moved and how you've engaged in kingdom work and just what He is pulling you to do, between that and what I've been told and what I've also just seen of you over the years, you seem to have this strong commitment to wholeheartedly serving and giving to the church, giving your life to the Lord in terms of time, energy, resources. And speaking for myself, and I know I'm not alone in this, that perspective and attitude does not come naturally to most, I think, and even feels alien to a lot of us. So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how you just developed that attitude and perspective, and what specifically drives it.
Well, I love the church, and I think this love developed a long time ago. My parents loved and served in the church, and they were very careful not to be critical of the church in front of my sister and I. And I think that it's often parents that are the ones that turn their kids off to the church through their critical spirits and just unthoughtful comments about the church. And as Nancy and I raised our kids, we were very careful not to do that, but to have a positive reflection about the church in front of them. That's not to say that the church is perfect.
Yeah,
we know it's not, but we need to be careful not to badmouth the church leadership or the people in the church because they're our brothers and sisters in Christ. And I think that the love for the church developed a long time ago, and I credit my parents for instilling that in me. In 1997, my roommate from college was dying of cancer. I flew back to Chicago to visit him before he died. He was a Christian, but he spent his whole life pursuing wealth and athletic activities, and not a whole lot of time was spent serving the church. And when I visited him, I asked him what he would tell somebody about life now that his was ending, and he said simply, "Don't waste your time." And I asked what he meant by that, and he says if he could do it all again, he would do the things that would last for eternity instead of the things that were just fleeting. And I think he reflected what the Bible says in Colossians 4:5 and Ephesians 4:16, I think it is, or 5:16, about redeeming the time. We're put here on earth and given a certain amount of time, and I think we have an assignment that we need to carry out during that time that God gives us, and we need to use that time wisely and doing things that count for eternity. So we all know life is a ticking clock. I'm reminded of that with my sister's recent death. And God has chosen us to be ministers of reconciliation to the world, and His means of doing that is through His church, and that's what drives me. So I was also motivated to give to and serve the church through the wisdom of the book of Ecclesiastes. We look at life from an under the sun or earthly perspective, and nothing we do really matters. So, why give time to the church? But if we look at things from God's perspective, everything we do matters. The book closes, by saying, God will bring every act to judgment, everything which is hidden, whether it is good or evil. And I just think that I want to live a life that is not wasted. And God has chosen the church as his instrument to reconcile the world, and I want to be a part of that work.
I remember, I don't know if it was in high school or college, but there was at some point that I was at your house for, I don't know, we were getting ready to, I almost want to say that it was getting ready for a garage sale, or there's some kind of activity that was going on at your house. I don't know if that sounds like a thing that would have happened, but we were over there for some reason, and it was a nice house. I don't know if you're still living in the same house or not. You are? Okay. So it was a nice house, and I assumed fit your family needs, but I think I could see even then, knowing that you were a doctor, given your profession, that you were living very humbly and well below your means as a doctor. And obviously that gives you opportunity, which I know you've used, but not broadcast, to give resources to the church and other things that serve God. I just wonder, has that mode of life come naturally to you? And if so, kind of what do you think has contributed to that? Or have there been any times where you felt a conviction to give in terms of either time or resources in a way that you resisted or really, really found difficult?
Our house cost $230,000 in 1992. It sounds pretty cheap now. And it was a real blessing and more than adequate for the needs of our family. I wouldn't say, though, that we were living well below our means.
Oh, okay.
There are doctors that are rich, but I think a lot of them are workaholics. And they just spend so much time away from their family, and I don't think they're involved in the church. And in reality, a doctor has a choice of how many hours he's going to spend working, and I kind of chose to limit mine to 40 to 50 hours a week.
Okay.
And some of that was at night, so my family was just sleeping soundly while I was off working. But I made maybe 2/3 of the amount that my partner was making, because he chose to see more patients and take more call and just work harder. So I wanted to spend more time with my family and be able to have time for church too. So it was a good job being a doctor, but it wasn't something that made me rich. I had enough money that I was not concerned too much about how I was going to provide, but I didn't have too much money that would bring along frustrations and temptations.
Yeah.
So I tried to keep that income right in the middle.
That choice still speaks to, I think, what I'm getting at, because like you said, that's not necessarily typical of what a lot of doctors would choose. I mean, your potential income was significantly more than what you chose for it to be. And so I'm really interested in kind of that choice.
Yeah, that would be true, I think. I could have worked harder and made more. But we were able to support the church financially. Red Mountain has never been a church that had any big sugar daddies, that gave millions of dollars for programs and buildings and stuff like that. We often say that we're Costco kind of folks. And Nancy and I have been part of that giving core for many years. We haven't been money hoarders, saying that well, we're going to work hard and invest and keep this money, and someday we'll give it to the church. We gave as the Lord prospered us. So we never just accumulated a ton of wealth. And sometimes it's not easy to give, though. I covet things more than I'd like to. Sometimes when I can't sleep, I imagine that I have a huge garage, like Jay Leno, and I make a list of all the cars and trucks and motorcycles that I'd like to have in my huge garage that doesn't exist. I do the same thing for guns that I'd like to collect. I like cowboy guns from the 1800s.
Oh, wow.
And it's just a form of coveting. But looking back, I think I've indulged in more of the pleasures of the world than I'd like to have done. I feel like Oscar Schindler in that movie Schindler's List. Toward the end, he's looking at the rings on his finger and his big Mercedes, and he's saying, I could have helped free Jews from death if I wouldn't have bought this stuff. And I clung to it instead. And I think, I feel somewhat the same way now that I'm 70 years old, that I could have and still could give more to God's work, because we are rescuing people, in a sense, from spiritual death. And that's even more important than the work that Oscar Schindler, was doing. So it's something that you can always do more.
Yeah. And yet, even as I kind of hear the tension in recognizing I can do more, but ultimately when we hit that moment of decision, that's really hard. That call to be generous, to be self-sacrificing, in those moments, it's a bit like God asking us to walk out onto the skinny branch of a tree with him, and it's scary, and we wonder if we're going to fall and get hurt. And so I'm wondering, how have you experienced, as you made some of those kind of skinny branch choices, how have you experienced God's care and providence for you as you've committed various things to him in your life?
Well, that's kind of a hard one to answer, because we can't see everything that our sovereign God has done for us in our lives, how he has provided and all that stuff. It's sometimes hard to see that. You can look at it one way and say, yeah, I've committed and trusted the Lord, and he's provided throughout my whole life. It's I look back and once in medical school, we were down to our last Twinkie and didn't know where the next meal was really going to come from. And Nancy's grandfather gave us $5,000, and that saw us through that time. And we could say that the Lord provided for and supplied all our needs. But there's another scenario. I can look back on my life and say, hey, I was a doctor, I had a good job, and I had enough money, and I really didn't get to the point where I crawled out on the skinny branches at all. I was able to stay on the fat branches, the secure branches, and still have enough money to be generous and appear to everybody else, like I fooled you maybe, in appearing self-sacrificial. And my hunch is that second scenario is more true. I think if I did live my life again, I would make it a point to crawl out on the skinny branches a bit more, because I was sticking pretty close to the trunk of the tree. It just didn't look like that.
Well, I appreciate your humility and perspective on your own life. Yeah. Thank you so much for just being willing to open up and let me dissect your brain and your thoughts a little bit. This is really
like an
great.
axe in the brain.
Oh gosh! Oh my gosh!
Yeah, won't forget that anytime soon.
You don't like that picture in your head, huh?
Well, and I'm guessing he lost with the brother. Like the other brother got the inheritance.
I don't know.
Well,
That was
maybe it was a hate to see the
2003.
yeah. You think this is bad? Hate to see the other guy kind of situation. So
yeah.
hopefully not.
Oh my gosh! Yeah. But anyway, yeah. Thank you so much for taking the time and doing this, Keith. Really, really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me, and greetings to all the podcasters out there that are listening.
Well, that was, man, I feel like there was a bunch of different threads that we could have tugged at for longer.
Each one could have been an hour.
Yeah.
In and of itself.
Yeah. But I mean, like, as we said, between recording, that was like all killer, no filler. That
Yeah.
was like just some great stuff to dig into. So what would be maybe one thing that particularly stands out to you from our time talking to Keith?
I think the thing I'm most struck by is Keith's just devotion to the local church. As like young adult pastor here, like, and just as myself as 28 years old, I want to be just a church person, someone who serves the church, has a genuine, true love for not just this global church that we do love, but an actual local, realized outcropping of it.
Yeah.
And I want to produce those in young adults. And so thinking of someone who spent 70 years, or 60 from when he became a Christian, of just loving and serving and being devoted to a local manifestation of the bride of Christ. I'm just encouraged by that happens, that's possible, that the Spirit produces that in people. And it just gets me geeked up and passionate about pursuing that myself and hopefully discipling those I'm charged with towards that. So I think that's overall what has struck me the most.
Yeah. I think for me, it was seeing, and this is just because I have a tendency toward darker thoughts anyway, but I mean the connection between his motivation in terms like how he just wanted to, what motivated him to give and to invest in the church, in the work of the Lord. There was a couple of things connected to mortality that fed into that, but one certainly was his talk with his friend, his roommate, and so he had at that time this greater sense, and he said, commenting now, I think he also said in the wake of his sister's passing, he just mentioned these touchstones of mortality that gave him perspective on life and how he wants to use these short few years that we have. And that's, mortality is something I'm 44 now, and I've been kind of processing it really intently since turning about 38 or so, and I think that's just going to continue. And it really does bring clarity and focus to life and make some things that seemed big seem much smaller, and some things that should seem bigger, it does bring into focus more. And I just wish that I could have started having that kind of process, that awareness of mortality earlier in life, because we're surrounded by depictions of death in our fiction and our entertainment and stuff like that, but we're not really in Western society up close and personal with death like people are in third world countries and in the past, where it was much more common at younger ages to be, right up close to death. Now it's happens off in hospitals and we often miss it,
We get to avoid it.
So just hearing how death and mortality really played a role in that, I was just like, yeah, man, how can we get better as a people, as Christians, at processing those kinds of things earlier and allowing them to really have their weightiness and impact that we so often, I think, want to escape from. Anyway, yeah, great, man. There's so much there. Anyway, but that is it for this time, I think, for this episode of the Red Mountain Community Church podcast. You can follow Red Mountain Community Church on Instagram and Facebook, where you can also leave us comments and suggestions to help make the show better. Also, be sure to subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening so you don't miss out on the next episode. In the meantime, I'm Peter Franson.
And I'm Zach Hollifield.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on Sunday.